Welcome back. My name is Chris, and in this video, I want to talk about navigating apps in S/4HANA. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the system, I have other videos that introduce you to S/4HANA and give you the look and feel of the system. In this video, I really just want to focus on the subject of apps and get you some basic familiarity with them. So, first off, let's make sure we understand what an app even is. You're probably already familiar with it, but if not, an app is simply a particular functionality in the system relevant to a particular record. So regardless of whether you're dealing with sales orders or purchase orders, business partners, there's many different things you can do with these records. You can create new ones, you can change them, you can move them around, etc. All of those different pieces of functionality get their own app. And the reason I'm talking about this in its own video is because, frankly, there are so many apps in the system that it can be a point of overwhelm for brand new users in the system. So I want to have a video just to give you a little bit more familiarity with how to think about apps and help yourself navigate around in them. And with that in mind, let's dive into the system. All right, so here we are in S/4HANA. We're going to come over here to the search bar, and you can see it's already filtered by apps. We're going to search for, let's say, a sales order. And by the way, we're not searching for a sales order, we're searching for apps that are tied to or in some way related to sales orders. So you can see the results here are 43 just for sales order, which gives you a context of, again, if you're not familiar with the system, it can be overwhelming with so many apps. You just don't know what you should be interacting with. So let's come down here. We can see all these tiles. Each tile represents its own app. And I even have this show more button at the bottom. And I can do that a few times, clicking it, to show more and more apps. So at the end of the day, every one of these apps, you can see 43 in total, will in some way interact with a sales order or something adjacent to a sales order. Now, the best way to get oriented, in my opinion, is to first understand the concept of authorizations. There are 4 levels of authorization with any app or any record really that you're going to be dealing with in the S/4HANA system. The first level is display. In other words, you can look at that record. In this case, we're talking about sales orders. You can create, so make a new sales order. You can change. That would be editing, modifying, in some way making an alteration to an existing sales order. And then finally, delete authorization, which is, of course, when you're dealing with an ERP system, you generally don't want to delete things, but that is a functionality that you can have, and that is the final highest level of authorization. So thinking with these 4 levels, display, create, change, and delete, you'll see in the apps themselves a lot of those words reflected either explicitly or in similar terminology. So let's take a look at that. First level is display. So let's take a look at some of these apps. We can see right here, display sales order cost estimates. Good. Display uncosted sales order items. You can kind of ignore, in this particular case, I'm trying to orient you, so ignore the middle and later half of the title and just focus on that first word. Display, display. These are going to be looking at either sales orders or things relevant to sales orders. So down from that, we have list. So that's going to be looking at not just one sales order, but a full kind of row by row listing of sales orders. List duplicate sales orders, track sales orders. That's where we're going to be following and looking at information relevant to sales orders. So that's the lowest level display authorization. Then we go up to create. So we've got a few apps here that say create. We've got create sales order here. We have create sales order automatic extraction. We also have apps that don't say create, but they really do a similar thing. For example, if I scroll up, here we have import sales order. So import, that's bringing in new information, and you can have an import in 2 ways. One would be creating entirely new records, like new sales orders, or it might be changing or modifying existing sales orders. So import could do both of those. And that's a common theme. A lot of these apps don't only just do one level of authorization, they might incorporate 2 or 3 or even all 4 of the possible authorization levels. So up from create, we have change. I talked about import. We also have edit up here, edit sales order substitution. And I'm sure if I scroll down here, we'll come across, right here, change sales orders. Then of course up from that we have delete. Now there is not a delete app here, which again, that's pretty common. You won't often run across delete apps, and many users simply don't have the authorization to access them in the first place. So that is one way to think about things. And similar to what I was saying, where you can have apps that incorporate many different functionality, a good example of that would be a manage app. So, and keep in mind, I'm using an example of sales orders, but we could be talking about business partners, bills. It really doesn't matter. These kinds of apps are going to exist for all types of records you're going to deal with. So manage sales orders, for example, not only can allow you to manage or change a sales order, you can also look at a full listing of sales orders. You can create new sales orders. You have a lot of different functionality there. So let's actually open up, let's say we want to create a new sales order. Let's get a concept of what that app might look like. And you can see right here, I have a create sales order, but I actually want to show you this app. This is actually a different one than the one I want to initially show you, which is up here, create sales order. So we're going to click on this one. And what we get brought to is the first thing is it pops up this window asking for some basic information. Now, I'm not going to explain kind of what I'm doing here. This gets into creating records and in this case, the order to cash process. I'm just trying to orient you to what do these apps tend to look like. So I'm just going to input this information very quickly and really get to the actual record itself, which is here, and try to tell you and have you look for certain patterns that you're going to see with all kinds of apps. So in this particular case, some common stable points you're going to see is in the top left, you're going to get a naming of what this thing is that you're dealing with. So in this case, we're creating a new sales order, so it says sales order. Down from that, you're going to have a taskbar. Now, in this case, the taskbar is on the right. Sometimes, as I'm going to show you in just a minute, you'll actually see that taskbar on the left. And the taskbar really just shows a bunch of different buttons that are in some way relevant to this record. If I was dealing with a business partner, I'd have entirely different buttons included there at the top. Down from that, we have what can be considered header level information. Now, in this particular case, we haven't even created a sales order, so there's no information here. But the header level section will generally have information like who you're selling to, what's the total value of that sales order, that kind of information included in the top. And then down from that, depending on the app, it will be configured in a few different ways, but generally speaking, they all will have some form of tabs that will include many fields that you can interact with down below. So in this particular case, we have general information. I would still consider this header level. A lot of the info that we would input here when saving the record, that would then appear up at the actual header portion of this page. And then we, of course, have the item level. So this is the line level. In this particular app, it's configured as just another tab. In some apps, you'll actually have it be another section lower down on the page, but the functionality is the same. You have prices. Also, if we come back over here to items, one additional thing you can have here is if I input an item here, I can also drill down into that particular item. Now, I'm not going to go through that right now in this particular video, but if I put in the particular item, I'd have a little arrow that appears on the right here, and it would allow me to drill down into that particular item and look at and even interact with the information relevant to that item. And again, that's just for this particular app. There are some apps where the ability to drill down is not going to be shown on the right. It might be shown as an entire additional section lower down. Again, it really just depends on the kind of app, but the functionality is the same. These are all the kinds of things you'd expect to see from an app. So just to give another good example of that, I actually want to show you something that I kind of pointed out earlier in this video. If I come in on this second tab and I open up Create Sales Order. And in that particular case, this was the app that I already opened, but we saw this other app here, this Create Sales Order VA01. Well, let's open up that. This brings us to an entirely new concept, which is that there's kind of two major categories of apps in the S/4HANA system. One category, which is exactly what we're seeing here, these are called what you could refer to as UI5 apps. And you can actually even see that if you click on our little icon over here and come down to the About. On any app that you're on, you can always do that. And under Framework ID, you can get a concept of, is this a UI5 app? Now, what does UI5 mean and why is it called that way? It's not particularly relevant. The concept is just these types of apps have a particular look to them. And you often won't hear them called UI5. You'll often hear them referred to as Fiori Apps. So this is an example of a Fiori app for creating a sales order. The other major category of app is what we're seeing over here. This is what's called a GUI app. Or to be more technical, it's actually called a SAP GUI for HTML. That's the full technical name in contrast to UI5. But again, for simplicity's sake, we'll call Fiori apps on the left-hand side, and then on the right here, what we're doing with now, we're just going to call them GUI apps. So these two apps, the Fiori app that I have open on this left tab and the GUI app I have on the right, they're both accomplishing the exact same thing. And as you'll see, they really ask the same information. So if you remember when I opened up that other app, it had a little window pop up asking for some basic info. In this case, we're getting the same thing. So I have to put my order, my sales organization, distribution channel, division. I had to input that same information on the other app. With that information input, I can hit continue. And it brings us to an app that you could argue that there is a difference in look to it, but really when you start breaking it down, you start to see the patterns between the apps. So we still have our taskbar at the top. We've got various buttons in that taskbar that do important things relevant to a sales order. At the very top, we have the name of what we're interacting with, create standard order. In the top here, we have our header level information. Things like who are we selling to, what is the net value of the order, etc. We have a series of tabs down below. And in this particular case, it looks like the line levels, instead of being included in a tab, it's broken down into another section down below. So there's some small differences in terms of how these things are organized, but as long as you can expect certain pieces of information in certain places, it really doesn't matter whether you're going to be dealing with a Fiori app, a GUI app, whether it's for sales orders, purchase orders, business partners. There are going to be small changes to how these apps are all configured, but the basic concept of how you're going to be interacting with those records and that information, there is a sense of uniformity to it. And as long as you can understand how these things are broken down, you'll start to gain a familiarity for the system much more rapidly. So that's a quick introduction to navigating apps in S/4HANA. If you found this video helpful, hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. If you also want full-length courses on S/4HANA, its various modules, and even additional SAP products, check out my course website. I'll include a link for that down in the description to be able to access any of those. And with all of that in mind, I hope to see you in the next video.